What's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul with a comic haul for Liberty Hill Comics, where I share my passion and over 40 years experience comic book collecting, investing, and conservation with you. The comic book we are discussing today is another Golden Age All-Star Comics issue for my personal collection that I picked up from Jeff, the Golden Age Guru, while I was at the Collector Summit in Dallas, hosted by Fanalytics at Heritage Auctions. It was a great show and a pleasure meeting Jeff, so let's get right into it. Well, what is it and why do we care? This is All-Star Comics number 20 in CGC 7.0 Universal with off-white to white pages. It's the spring of 1944 issue, published at the peak of the war era Golden Age. It features the first appearance of a villain known as the Monster, who is a bit of a Mr. Hyde type with a twist, but more on that in a moment. This copy is from the Secret Sound collection that Jeff recently purchased, only the second collection ever to be designated as a provenance collection by CGC. For those not familiar, the Justice Society of America were the first superhero team in all of comic books, and some believe they were the greatest superhero team to ever grace the pages of funny books. When comics fandom got started in earnest in the early 1960s, putting together a complete run of all-star comics was a rite of passage, considered a must for anybody who considered themselves a serious comic book collector. All-Star Comics featured the JSA in 55 issues, published over 11 years, from their first appearance here in issue number 3 in 1940 until issue number 57 in March of 1951. All-Star Comics had 3 writers for the entire 11-year run. Gardner Fox, the first and greatest of the JSA writers, wrote 2/3 of their tales, including their introductory story here in All-Star number 3. All-Star was published by All American Comics, which was co-marketed with National and Detective Comics under the DC bullet at the time, and later merged into the company we know today as DC Comics. All-Star Comics is one of the most important Golden Age comic book series, and it has several big keys issues, in addition to the first appearance of the JSA, including the first female superheroine in all of comic books, which is Hawkgirl in issue number 5. The first time Batman and Superman meet, which occurs in issue number 7, and the mega key of the series, the first appearance of Wonder Woman in issue 8 by William Moulton Marston. It also includes first appearances of JSA villains, Brainwave in issue 15, the Psycho Pirate in issue 23, the Wizard in issue 34, Perdegaton in issue 35, the Injustice Society in issue 37, and the Alchemist in issue 42. In issue number 57, the last issue, we have the first and only appearance of the villainous Key, as well as the last Golden Age appearance of Dr. Midnight, the Flash, and Green Lantern. All 3 would be absent from comic books for over a decade after this comic was published. All-Star Comics is one of the most important and influential of Golden Age comic book series and is highly sought after by Golden Age collectors. It's my favorite Golden Age title, and one of my life goals is to complete the Golden Age run in mid to high grade. So, acquiring issue number 20 in CGC 7.0 was a step toward my goal. With that intro for context, let's get into this issue written by Gardner Fox with the cover, introductory, and conclusion chapters penciled by Joe Gallagher. As I said, it is the first appearance of the Monster, who seems to be visibly based on Lon Chaney's character, the Man in the Beaver Hat, from the silent film London After Midnight, produced in 1927, and certainly a film that writer Gardner Fox and penciler Joe Gallagher would have been familiar with, as it was a huge pop culture influence at the time and was remade only 10 years later. The Monster doesn't make another Golden Age appearance, but does appear in later DC comics featuring the All-Star Squadron and the JSA, including the introductory preview of the All-Star Squadron in Justice League of America number 193. Before we even get into the story, the inside cover has some great historical info I find fascinating. Firstly, the DC family of comic books, published by 3 different publishers at the time, lists a consolidated editorial board in an effort to keep the comic content wholesome and American during a time of extreme nationalism. There are also notes about the War Production Board restricting the use of paper for comic books, which resulted in fewer pages per comic and fewer comic books being produced, and once-monthly books going to bi-monthly and bi-monthly books going to quarterly, including our beloved All-Star Comics. Lastly, nearly a full page is dedicated to the fact that paper is a weapon of war, and urging citizens to do their patriotic duty and recycle all paper products. No wonder so few comic books survive from this era. Later in the book, there is a full-page public service announcement starring Green Lantern and Doiby Dickles dedicated to recycling paper and urging Americans to recycle their waste paper. It was considered un-American to put waste paper in the trash. With that bit of history out of the way, let's dive into the story. The splash page is essentially the same as the cover, although Wonder Woman is oddly missing from what is otherwise essentially the same composition as the cover with a few little changes, including a redrawing of Johnny Thunder. Roll call is given as Hawkman, the Atom, Dr. Fate, Spectre, Sandman, Starman, Dr. Midnight, and Johnny Thunder, with Wonder Woman listed as secretary since William Moulton still insisted on writing all copy for his creation, and not having the time to script her in All-Star Comics, she was essentially just window dressing here and not generally included in the adventures of the team at the time. The story proper starts with Hawkman informing the team that their meeting will be attended by industrial magnate Jason Rogers, who needs their help because he's being plagued by the monster, and we're informed that the JSA has been trying to do something about the monster for months to no avail. Mr. Rogers informs them the monster has been tormenting him and left plans in his residence for his upcoming evil deeds. Mr. Rogers explains he's always been jinxed with bad luck, that years earlier he had filmed a picnic with his wife, and upon viewing the film he developed under infrared light, she shrank from him in horror, her heart gave out, and she died. He explains that he also showed the film at the club, after which all his friends abandoned him. Hawkman consoles him, and the team set out to stop the monster. Hawkman's solo chapter is penciled by Sheldon Moldoff, his regular penciler in Flash Comics at the time. In it, while on his way to steal Baron Harlan Walsh's home, he briefly stops to save a man from some thugs in a bog, but rushes away after hog-tying the men before finding out why they were beating their victim. We see the monster is already at Harlan Walsh's house, and admonishing him to send the Hawkman away or else suffer the consequences. Upon arriving, Hawkman realizes Harlan Walsh is the man he just saved in the bog, but Harlan rebuffs his help against the monster, as he was instructed, and Hawkman leaves. Upon leaving, Hawkman encounters the man from the bog, who reveals himself as the real Harlan Walsh, and explains that the man that had just sent Hawkman away was his twin, Marvin, who had a gambling problem. Harlan explained that the night before, his twin had arrived with some thugs who intended to take Harlan on a one-way trip so his brother could replace him. Returning to the house with Harlan on foot, Hawkman quickly dispatches Marvin, who reveals the whereabouts of the monster's hideout, which Hawkman sets off for and quickly finds. Entering the monster's hideout, Hawkman easily defeats his henchmen, but the monster slips away. So, while Hawkman foiled the monster's plans, he was unable to bring him in, a common theme through the rest of the chapters. The Spectres chapter is penciled by Bernard Bailey, his regular artist from More Fun Comics at the time. In it, the monster detonates explosives, rocking the Noonan building as the Spectre shows up. After pulling the last inhabitant of the building to safety, the Spectre grows in size until the Noonan building is the size of a marble in his hand, and he hurtles the still-burning building into outer space. Upon returning to human size, the Spectre learns that the man he saved was Walter Noonan, architect and Jason Rogers' only friend, who has also been plagued by the monster because of his friendship with Rogers, whom the monster despises. The Spectre urges Noonan to agree to a ransom demand from the monster, so that the Spectre can locate and defeat the monster. Knowing the ransom payment to be a trap set by the Spectre, the monster agrees to meet Noonan at midnight anyway. The Spectre lies in wait until after the payoff, then ambushes the monster and his men. He quickly dispatches the monster's henchmen. But the monster proves to be the Spectre's match in combat, battling him to a standstill before making a daring escape between two subway trains. The Adams chapter is drawn by Joe Gallagher. In it, the Atom shows up to an office building from which the monster had revealed he would steal a payroll. Upon arriving, he notices a queer aircraft that resembles a helicopter shaped like a flying saucer with an observation deck about the ring. A powerful electromagnet lowered from the craft latches onto a safe in the building when the Atom arrives to start beating on the monster's goons. The Atom hitches a ride on the magnet in an attempt to stop the monster and his team of henchmen. While the Atom exchanges fisticuffs with the gangsters, the strange craft lands at a lighthouse, and the waiting monster drops a net on the Atom, capturing him. Defeated, and facing a firing squad, the Atom feigns cowardice, and, dropping to the ground to beg mercy, snatches up a stone. Just as the monster instructs his men to fire upon him, the Atom successfully throws the rock into the monster's aircraft, activating the electromagnet, which pulls the goons' guns toward it and even pulls the bullets aimed at the Atom from the air. Good thing the monster's men were using full steel metal-jacketed rounds, or the Atom would be a goner. The Atom dispatches the monster's goons, but the monster flies away in his craft to keep his scheme schedule on track. Dr. Midnight's chapter is drawn by Stan Ash and opens with Dr. Midnight on the operating table of Dr. Horatio Hill, disgraced surgeon, now in the employ of the monster. Dr. Hill provides his backstory, and observant readers will notice he clearly doesn't care about proper surgical mask etiquette. I'd hate to be behind him in line at the Walmart during a pandemic. The monster drugged Dr. Hill and arranged for him to operate on a senator while drugged because he wanted a talented surgeon in his employ. The senator died, and the disgraced surgeon accepted the monster's offer of employment to avoid destitution and disgrace, but resented the monster for his circumstance and vowed to repay him. It's then we learn in flashback that Dr. Midnight met with billionaire Roland Cord, a victim of the monster and Dr. Hill, who was horribly disfigured by the surgeon and told his face would be restored only if he agreed to pay their extortion fee. Cord hired men to track the monster to a hideout in the swamp and agrees to lead Dr. Midnight there. Dr. Midnight enters the hideout, but the monster is there and his men overwhelm Dr. Midnight and take him and Mr. Cord prisoner. The flashback ends and Dr. Hill releases Dr. Midnight, believing him the only man who can outwit the monster and thereby bring him to justice, and the monster shoots Dr. Hill in response. Dr. Midnight and the monster fight and are evenly matched, so the monster departs, leaving Dr. Midnight to attempt to save the life of Dr. Hill. Hill, dying, gives Dr. Midnight the formula to restore Mr. Cord's face, which he does before setting out after the monster again. Starman's chapter is penciled by Stan Ash and opens with Starman arriving at the estate of millionaire Ira Young, where he's hosting a charity bazaar and showing off the planetarium he just had built. Starman, who in his Ted Cord alias is an amateur astronomer, watching from outside the planetarium, notices that the planetarium constellation Canis Major is missing its brightest star, Sirius. You might say its Sirius was black. Just then, the guests within the planetarium are gassed, and the monster's thugs move in to loot the unconscious guests. Starman bursts into the planetarium and engages the thugs in combat. The monster appears and begins looting guests, while Starman is occupied with his henchmen. The monster flees unnoticed with the cash meant for the charity bazaar. Once Starman realized the monster must have been there because of the missing cash, he searches for the monster and, seeing him, gives pursuit, chasing the monster to yet another of his hideouts, which is a trap. The monster's trap, intended to kill Starman, only dazes him as he was protected by his star rod. The monster, thinking Starman dead, stashes his loot and leaves the scene. Once Starman retains his wits, he retrieves the stashed loot and returns it to the rightful owners at the Young estate, and explains that a solid form of the knockout gas had been placed on the planetarium lens and, when heated, had turned to gaseous form and knocked out the guests. Johnny Thunder's chapter is also penciled by Stan Ash and opens with Johnny approaching the Black Star Jewelry House, another of the monster's called shots to rob. As Johnny walks up, he encounters two police officers who are laughing uncontrollably. Upon questioning, they reveal that the jewelry house is being robbed. Johnny enters the jewelry house and encounters the monster's thugs, who are ready for him. They hit him with laughing gas and take him to the monster, who announces to Johnny that he is going to be beheaded. Johnny's Thunderbolt shows up to stop the executioners, who run off after apparently breaking an axe on Johnny's neck, and he frees Johnny and they set off after the monster. Johnny and his Thunderbolt make pretty short work of the monster's men, but Johnny attempts to bring the monster to justice by himself and is no match for the monster, who casts him aside abruptly. The Thunderbolt then battles the monster to submission, but was ordered by Johnny to leave the last blows for him, so he must relent before the monster is defeated. Johnny comes to, and, in no shape to fight, stands dazed while the monster makes his escape yet again. Having foiled all of the monster's plans, but failing to bring the monster in, the JSA meet back at the palatial estate of Jason Rogers, where Rogers congratulates and thanks them before attempting to screen his home movie for them in the hopes they can solve the mystery of why anyone viewing the movie is turned against him. However, the film has been in his vault, unviewed for so long that it has no image on it. Mr. Rogers retires to his darkroom in the hopes that he can recover some viewable footage while the JSA are served food by his staff. Worried that Jason failed to return after hours, the JSA enters his darkroom to find it empty and in disarray. Just then, the monster appears, quickly dispatching Johnny Thunder and the Atom, while explaining as engaging Hawkman in battle that he hates Jason Rogers because Jason is his twin brother who stole his body. The monster takes on the entire JSA in battle and holds his own, but realizing the fight is at a standstill, pulls a ray gun to use on the JSA. Johnny Thunder recovers and kicks the gun just as the monster fires it, and the monster shoots himself in the face and is thus subdued. The team find the restored film and, watching it, learn that the monster and Jason Rogers are one and the same. Unaware he was hosting the monster, Jason Rogers blacked out whenever the monster took over his body. The film had caught his transformation, which is why it turned everyone against him. But Jason couldn't see the transformation because he was not able to see in the infrared. Jason regains consciousness long enough to hear the explanation and dies at peace, knowing that with his death, the monster will plague society no more. All-Star Comics number 20 is a pretty rare book. There are only 54 universal copies in the CGC Census, with a median grade of 5.5. At 7.0, this copy ranks at the top 30th percentile, with 13 graded higher. So, what is this comic book worth? It's really difficult to place a true fair market value on this comic because they trade hands so infrequently. In fact, Go Collect notes only a single sale of a graded copy in the last 12 months, a 4.0 that sold for $470 in March of 2023 in a Comic Connect auction that was not really relevant to our 7.0. The last reasonable comp I was able to find is an 8.0 that sold for $1,237 in a heritage auction in June of 2022. Jeff, the Golden Age Guru, and I agreed upon $1,150 for this book at the Collector Summit in Dallas, which I think is a fair price given the relative rarity of this book and the fact very few people are interested in selling Golden Age books at fair market value these days. This book is for my personal all-star collection, and I'm not looking to sell it anytime soon, but I still want to be very well bought in my collection because getting a good deal on a rare Golden Age book is a big part of the fun for me. As I've discussed before, you typically need to pay market prices to acquire higher grade Golden Age books. If I were trying to bargain hunt these comics, it's just not realistic to believe I could complete a full run of All-Star in my lifetime. With that in mind, I'm really thrilled to add another mid to high grade copy of All-Star to my personal collection. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. It's an embarrassment of riches to be the current caretaker of this piece of American and comic book history. I understand just how fortunate I am to be able to put this sort of capital into a funny book, believe me. For those of you interested in reading the Justice Society of America's adventures in All-Star Comics with a more modest investment, there are a number of less expensive alternatives. There's digital, of course, and for the analog folks, I recommend the beautiful archive editions from DC, the first one of which for All-Star Comics was published in 1992. I hope you enjoyed this video on this Golden Age All-Star comic featuring the JSA. By adding this beauty to my collection, I'm one step closer toward my goal of completing the original run. What are you collecting? And how close are you to completing that collection? Are you a completionist, or do you just go after keys? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Till next time, happy hunting and take care of one another.